Have you ever wondered about those grand, sweeping historical mysteries that seem to echo through time, whispers of forgotten empires and legendary figures whose lives shaped the very world we inhabit today? It's a bit like trying to piece together a colossal jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing, isn't it? We gaze back at these moments, like looking into a slightly fogged mirror, seeing reflections of power, ambition, and transformation. Yet the full picture often eludes us. Sometimes we stumble upon the remnants of colossal armies that vanished without a trace, or decipher ancient texts that hint at secrets still waiting to be unearthed. The past, in its quiet grandeur, holds so many of these tantalizing enigmas, and tonight we're going to gently peel back the layers of one of the most enigmatic figures to ever walk the earth, a man whose name still commands awe and, let's be honest, a touch of trepidation. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, why not drop a comment with your location and local time? It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from as we drift off into history together. Now, imagine a land, vast and unforgiving, where the wind whispers tales of hardship across endless steppes, a place where survival was a daily negotiation with nature itself. This was the Mongolian plateau in the mid-12th century, a realm of nomadic tribes, each fiercely independent, often at odds with their neighbors, constantly vying for grazing lands and influence. It was a world utterly unlike our own, where wealth wasn't measured in gold or grand buildings, but in the health of your herd and the strength of your kinsmen. Life was a continuous cycle of movement, following the seasons and the grass, a harsh existence that bred resilience, cunning, and an almost instinctual understanding of the land. In this crucible of survival, amidst the felt yurts and the thundering hooves, a boy was born, a boy destined to shake the very foundations of this world and beyond. His name was Temüjin, and his birth itself was tinged with omens, as is often the case with those who are to become truly legendary figures. Tradition tells us he was born gripping a blood clot in his tiny fist, a sign, some say, of his future as a great warrior and conqueror. His father was Yesugei, a respected chieftain of the Borjigin clan, a man of considerable standing among the nomadic Mongols. Yesugei had just returned from a triumphant raid against the Tatars, a rival tribe, bringing back a captive chieftain named Temüjin Uge. It was from this captive that Yesugei, perhaps as a form of victory trophy or a subtle slight to his defeated foe, chose to name his newborn son. Little did anyone know then that this seemingly simple act of naming would tie the child to a destiny far grander than any chieftain could imagine. The air on the steppe was always crisp, carrying the scent of horse and smoke, and young Temüjin would have breathed it in from his very first moments. His early years were spent much like any other Mongol child's, learning to ride almost before he could walk, understanding the rhythm of the herd, and observing the subtle cues of the vast open land. He would have known the feel of the wind in his hair as he galloped across the plains, the warmth of a campfire on a cold night, and the quiet camaraderie of his family within the sturdy walls of their yurt. His mother, Hoelun, was a strong and capable woman, a testament to the resilience required of women in such a demanding environment. She had been abducted by Yasuge from another tribe, a common practice in those tumultuous times. But she had embraced her new life and raised her children with a fierce determination. Temüjin had several siblings, half-brothers and full brothers, creating a complex family dynamic that would play out in later years, as it often does when you have a large, sprawling family under one roof, or in this case, one felt tent. Historians still argue whether the story of Temujin's blood clot at birth is a literal fact or a later embellishment designed to underscore his predestined greatness. Either way, it serves to highlight the extraordinary aura that surrounded him even from his earliest days. His childhood, while seemingly ordinary for a nomad, was a crucible that forged the strength and character he would desperately need in the turbulent years to come. He was being prepared unconsciously for a life that would defy all expectations and rewrite the map of the world. It's funny how destiny works, isn't it? One moment you're a child playing on the steppe, the next you're, well, you'll see, the idyllic, if rugged, childhood of Temujin, learning the ways of the horse and the hunt on the endless steppes, was abruptly shattered by a tragedy that would irrevocably alter his path. His father, Yasuge, the respected chieftain, embarked on a journey likely to arrange a marriage for Temujin, a common practice to forge alliances and strengthen tribal ties. On his return journey, he encountered a camp of Tatars, the very tribe from whom he had taken his son's namesake captive. Now, in the subtle dance of steppe etiquette, it was customary to offer hospitality to travelers, even if they were from a rival tribe. So Yasuge, perhaps feeling secure in his own strength, or simply adhering to custom, accepted their invitation to share a meal. This, as it turned out, was a fateful decision, one that would plunge Temujin's family into immediate peril. The Tatars, nursing old grudges and seizing a moment of opportunity, poisoned Yasuge. It wasn't a quick, dramatic end, but a slow, insidious illness that crept upon him as he rode homeward. He managed to make it back to his family's encampment, but his strength was rapidly failing. Temüjin, a mere 9 years old, would have witnessed his strong, capable father succumb to this unseen enemy, his life draining away amidst the quiet despair of his family. The death of a chieftain was always a precarious moment for a nomadic clan, a sudden vacuum of power in a world where power was everything. Yasuge, with his dying breath, reportedly urged his young son, Temüjin, to take care of his mother and younger siblings. A heavy burden for such small shoulders, wouldn't you agree? It was a promise, unspoken but understood, that Temüjin, despite his tender age, was now the nominal head of the family. The immediate aftermath was devastating. Without Yasuge's strong leadership and formidable reputation, the alliances he had painstakingly built began to unravel almost immediately. The Borjigan clan, once united under his banner, started to fragment. Many of the chieftains and families who had pledged their loyalty to Yasuge saw Temüjin and his family, consisting primarily of women and young children, as a weakness, a burden rather than a source of strength. They reasoned, with a cold pragmatism that was characteristic of the steppe, that a lone widow and her young brood could offer little protection or advantage. In a land where survival hinged on collective strength and mutual support, An unprotected family was an open invitation for exploitation. And so, with a shocking swiftness that must have felt like a cruel betrayal, they abandoned Yesugei's family. They packed their yurts, rounded up their herds, and simply rode away, leaving Hoelun, Temüjin, and his siblings to face the harsh realities of the steppe alone. It was an act of profound cruelty and a stark reminder of the brutal indifference of their world. Imagine the scene: the vast plains, once filled with the bustling activity of a large encampment, now eerily silent, save for the wind whistling through empty spaces where yurts once stood. Hoelun, a woman of remarkable fortitude, gathered her children around her. She was not one to despair easily, but the odds were stacked impossibly high against them. Without the protection of a powerful clan, they were vulnerable to raids, starvation, and the unforgiving elements. This period of abandonment forced Temüjin and his family into an almost primal struggle for survival. They subsisted on roots, berries, fish caught from rivers, and small game hunted with rudimentary weapons. It was a humbling experience for a boy who had been born into a chieftain's family, a stark descent from relative comfort to abject poverty. Yet this very hardship, this forced self-reliance, instilled in Temüjin a resilience and a deep understanding of desperation that would shape his future leadership. He learned to hunt, to track, to endure, to make do with almost nothing. He saw firsthand the consequences of disunity and the vulnerability of the weak. This experience also forged an unbreakable bond within his immediate family, particularly with his mother, Hoelun, whose unwavering determination served as a constant source of strength. She taught her children how to survive, how to glean sustenance from the barren land, and perhaps most importantly, how to hold on to hope when all seemed lost. Historians still argue whether the desertion of Yesugei's clan was a complete, unanimous abandonment, or if some smaller factions might have lingered for a time before drifting away. Regardless, the impact on Temüjin's family was undeniably catastrophic. It stripped them bare, leaving them with nothing but their wits and their will to survive. This profound hardship, however, was not the end of Temüjin's story. It was merely the searing forge in which a future conqueror would be tempered. It's almost as if the universe, in its own peculiar way, was giving him a crash course in resilience, isn't it? Life on the steppe, already a constant struggle for survival, became even more perilous for Temüjin and his family after their abandonment. They lived on the edge, always searching for sustenance, always wary of threats. It was during this period of extreme vulnerability that Temüjin, still very much a boy, experienced another profound trauma: captivity. The Taichi-Ud, a rival clan and former allies of his father, saw the opportunity to eliminate a potential future threat. A young Yesugei's son, who despite his circumstances might one day seek revenge or reclaim his father's standing. They hunted down the scattered family and took Temüjin prisoner. Imagine the terror of a young boy, barely a teenager, torn from his already struggling family and thrust into the hands of hostile captors. The Taichi-Ud, perhaps to humiliate him and ensure he understood his place, fitted him with a kangwe, a heavy wooden yoke that restricted movement and prevented him from lying down comfortably. It was a common, brutal device used to control captives, a constant physical reminder of his subjugation. He was kept under strict guard, likely enduring endless days of grueling labor and the constant threat of worse. This period of captivity was not just physical torment, it was a psychological crucible. He witnessed the arrogance of his captors, their casual cruelty, and the utter helplessness of his situation. Yet even in this dark chapter, the resilience that defined Temüjin began to shine through. He observed his captors, learned their habits, and most importantly, nursed a burning desire for freedom. His escape, when it came, was a testament to his burgeoning cunning and bravery. One evening, during a festival or celebration, a moment when guards might be less vigilant, their attention diverted by merriment and perhaps a little too much fermented mare's milk, Temüjin saw his chance. The exact details are a bit murky, as often happens with legendary escapes, but the core narrative involves a daring, almost impossible feat. Some accounts suggest he waited until dark, slipped away from his sleeping guards, and with the heavy kangui still around his neck, plunged into a nearby river, using the dark current to carry him away from the camp. Others say he used the cover of a cloudy night, waiting for a moment when the light of the moon or stars was obscured, making his escape through the dense brush. It was a moment of sheer desperation meeting opportunity. Historians still argue whether Temüjin was actively helped by someone within the Taichi-Ud camp, perhaps a sympathetic guard or even a distant relative who felt pity for the boy. Regardless, the escape itself required immense courage and a clear head under pressure. He had to be quiet, resourceful, and utterly determined. After making his break, he found refuge with a compassionate family, the Soldis clan, who had once been loyal to his father. This family, recognizing the boy's inherent spirit and perhaps sensing his destined greatness, harbored him, providing him with food, shelter, and a crucial respite from his ordeal. They even helped him remove the dreaded Kang, a symbol of his captivity that he would forever remember. This escape was more than just a flight to freedom. It was a psychological turning point. It proved to Temüjin, and perhaps more importantly to others, that he was not easily broken. It demonstrated his ability to survive against overwhelming odds, to plot, and to execute a daring plan. It also instilled in him a profound distrust of his enemies and a deep understanding of the vulnerability of those without power. He had experienced firsthand the humiliation of servitude and the cold indifference of those who sought to dominate. This experience would undoubtedly fuel his later campaigns, driving his ruthless efficiency against those who stood in his way. He would remember the lessons learned while wearing that heavy wooden collar, lessons about the fragility of peace and the necessity of strength in a world that offered little mercy. It's almost as if life was constantly throwing obstacles in his path, each one designed to toughen him up for the colossal challenges that lay ahead, shaping him into the formidable figure he was destined to become. Having narrowly escaped the clutches of the Taichi-Uds, Temüjin, though still young, was no longer merely a boy. The harsh realities of his childhood, the abandonment, the constant struggle for sustenance, and the terrifying ordeal of captivity had forged in him a steely resolve and a keen understanding of the brutal dynamics of the steppe. He knew, with a certainty that only comes from lived experience, that survival depended on strength, loyalty, and cunning. This period marked the true emergence of a leader, not through inherited right, for he had lost that, but through sheer force of will and a growing capacity to inspire. His first priority, after his escape and recovery with the Suldus family, was to reunite with his scattered kin. His mother, Hoylan, and his siblings, including his brothers Kasser and Belgute, had also been struggling for survival, enduring similar privations. Their reunion must have been a poignant moment, a testament to their shared resilience. With his family once more around him, Temüjin began the arduous task of rebuilding. They were a small, vulnerable unit, but within this tight-knit group, Temüjin's natural authority began to assert itself. He wasn't simply the eldest brother. He was the one who consistently made the difficult decisions, the one who found ways to secure food, and the one who meticulously planned their movements to avoid danger. This wasn't leadership born of grand pronouncements, but of practical, day-to-day survival, demonstrating a quiet competence that earned the respect of his family. As Temüjin grew, so did his reputation, albeit slowly at first. He demonstrated an uncommon shrewdness in navigating the treacherous political landscape of the steppe. Rather than seeking direct confrontation with larger, more powerful tribes, he focused on building small, strategic alliances. He understood that in a fragmented world, unity, even on a small scale, was a powerful currency. One of his earliest and most significant alliances was with Togrul, the powerful Khan of the Kerate tribe. Togrul had been a sworn Anda, a blood brother to Temüjin's father, Yesuge. Temüjin, with a deference that belied his ambition, approached Togrul, reminding him of this ancient bond. This was a masterstroke of diplomacy. The Kerate, a formidable force, offered Temüjin a much-needed protective umbrella, lending him legitimacy and a degree of security in a deeply insecure world. It was a classic example of my enemy's enemy is my friend, but with a touch of familial respect thrown in for good measure. Another crucial relationship he cultivated was with Jamuka, a young man from the Jadaran tribe who also had an Anda bond with Temüjin from their childhood. Their friendship, forged in shared experiences, was initially strong, built on mutual respect and shared ambitions. They rode together, hunted together, and even exchanged gifts, solidifying their bond in the traditional Mongol way. Jamuka, a charismatic and skilled warrior, became an important ally in Temüjin's early efforts to gather followers. Together, they represented a formidable duo, attracting other disillusioned or ambitious young men to their nascent camp. However, the path to leadership on the steppe was never smooth, and alliances were as fluid as the shifting sands. Temüjin faced constant challenges, not just from rival tribes, but also from within his own nascent following. His insistence on discipline and fair distribution of spoils, though beneficial in the long run, sometimes chafed against the ingrained individualism of nomadic warriors. He had to be firm, sometimes even ruthless, to maintain order and loyalty. He learned to discern true loyalty from fleeting opportunism, a skill that would prove invaluable. Historians still argue whether Temüjin's early leadership was primarily driven by a desire for revenge for his father's death and his family's abandonment, or if it was a more pragmatic and strategic ambition to bring order and unity to the chaotic steppe. Likely it was a complex blend of both, a simmering resentment fueling a powerful vision for a better, more stable future. This complex tapestry of alliances and burgeoning authority would soon face its first major tests, demonstrating just how quickly the winds of fortune could change on the vast, unforgiving plains. The vast, windswept steppe, though seemingly empty, was a complex chessboard of shifting loyalties and strategic maneuvers. Temüjin, with his growing retinue and the powerful backing of Togrul Khan, was rapidly becoming a player of consequence. He understood that alliances were the bedrock of power in this fractured world, but he also learned, sometimes painfully, that such bonds could be as fleeting as a summer breeze. This section will delve into the intricate dance of early alliances and betrayals that defined Temujin's ascent, particularly focusing on the pivotal, yet ultimately tragic, relationship with Jamuka. Initially, the bond between Temujin and Jamuka was exemplary, a true Anda relationship, one forged in childhood and strengthened by shared ambition. They were comrades in arms, raiding together, sharing spoils, and mutually supporting each other in the cutthroat environment of the steppe. Jamuka, a charismatic and skilled warrior in his own right, was initially a vital asset to Temujin. He brought with him a considerable following, drawn to his prowess and the combined promise of their leadership. One might even say they were the dynamic duo of the nomadic world, like a steppe version of Batman and Robin, if Robin were equally ambitious and perhaps a bit more prone to dramatic flair. Their combined strength allowed them to stand against larger, more established tribes, and their early successes cemented their reputation. However, as Temujin's influence grew, subtle cracks began to appear in their bond. The fundamental difference in their leadership styles became increasingly apparent. Jamuka, a traditionalist, preferred the old ways, a loose confederation of independent clans, each led by its own chieftain, coming together for raids or defense, but retaining their autonomy. He valued individual prowess and the established hierarchies of the nomadic aristocracy. Temujin, on the other hand, envisioned something far more centralized and disciplined. He sought to break down the old tribal divisions, uniting disparate peoples under a single, unified command, where loyalty flowed directly to the leader, not to individual clan elders. He believed in meritocracy, promoting individuals based on skill rather than lineage. This fundamental ideological clash, though perhaps unspoken at first, created an underlying tension. The breaking point, as many historians recount, came during a period of shared encampment. A dispute arose over the division of spoils, or a minor transgression, the exact catalyst now lost to the winds of time, but the underlying issue was clear. Jamuka resented Temujin's growing authority and his unconventional methods. The traditional leaders within Jamuka's camp also likely felt threatened by Temujin's new vision, which challenged their inherited privileges. In a dramatic gesture, Jamuka gathered his followers and abruptly separated from Temujin's camp, declaring their formal dissolution of their Anda brotherhood. This was a profound personal and political betrayal. The severing of a blood brother bond was a deeply serious matter on the steppe, often leading to inevitable conflict. It meant that two individuals who had sworn eternal loyalty were now declared enemies, with all the bitter consequences that implied. This rupture forced Temüjin to choose his path unequivocally. He could have reverted to the old, fragmented ways, but he chose to embrace his vision of unity and discipline. Many who were discontent with the old tribal system, or who were drawn to Temüjin's promise of stability and greater opportunity, chose to stay with him rather than side with Jamuka. This included not only common warriors, but also important figures who recognized Temüjin's unique leadership qualities. The defection of these individuals further solidified Temüjin's position while simultaneously weakening Jamuka. The split between Temüjin and Jamuka illustrates a crucial aspect of steppe politics: the fluidity of power and the constant negotiation of loyalty. While the traditional bonds of kinship and anda were strong, they could be superseded by ambition, ideological differences, and the cold logic of survival. Historians still argue whether Jamuka's betrayal was primarily driven by personal jealousy and a perceived slight, or by a genuine belief that Temüjin's centralizing tendencies posed a threat to the traditional Mongol way of life. Whatever the true motivation, this personal schism between two former friends would escalate into open warfare, setting the stage for some of Temüjin's earliest and most significant military tests, trials that would further hone his strategic mind and harden his resolve. It was a stark lesson that in the quest for power, even the closest bonds could fray and snap, leaving behind only the bitter taste of rivalry. The rupture between Temüjin and Jamuka was not merely a personal falling out. It was a declaration of war, an inevitable clash between two competing visions for the future of the Mongol tribes. Jamuka, adhering to the traditional decentralized ways, rallied a significant number of chieftains who feared Temüjin's centralizing ambitions. Temüjin, on the other hand, gathered those who sought stability and were drawn to his promise of a unified, disciplined force. The stage was set for one of Temüjin's earliest and most pivotal military engagements, the Battle of Dağlıbozuk. The precise location of Dağlıbozuk, like many ancient battlefields on the vast steppe, is a subject of some historical debate, its exact coordinates lost to the shifting sands and centuries of nomadic movement. However, what is clear is that it was a significant confrontation, a test of wills and tactical acumen between the former blood brothers. Jamuka's forces were reportedly larger, comprising a coalition of clans who were perhaps more numerous, but lacked the cohesion that Temüjin was beginning to instill in his own nascent army. Temüjin, though numerically inferior, commanded a force that was increasingly disciplined, loyal, and unified under his direct command. This early battle was less about overwhelming force and more about the developing military philosophies of the two leaders. The battle itself was a chaotic affair, characteristic of steppe warfare, a maelstrom of thundering hooves, whistling arrows, and flashing blades. Nomadic battles often involved feigned retreats, flanking maneuvers, and rapid shifts in momentum, relying on the incredible horsemanship of the warriors. Temüjin, even at this early stage, demonstrated a burgeoning tactical genius. He was not just a brave warrior. He was a thoughtful commander, attentive to the movements of his enemy and quick to exploit weaknesses. He understood the terrain, the capabilities of his horsemen, and perhaps most importantly, the psychology of his opponents. Despite Temujin's growing tactical prowess, the Battle of Dahlan Baljut did not result in a decisive victory for him. In fact, most accounts suggest that his forces suffered a setback. Jamuka's larger numbers, and perhaps the lingering adherence to traditional, somewhat less coordinated battle tactics, initially overwhelmed Temujin's still developing army. This was not a rout, but a significant defeat, forcing Temujin to retreat and regroup. For a lesser leader, such a reverse might have been catastrophic, signaling the end of his ambitions. Yet for Temujin, it proved to be a harsh but invaluable lesson. The defeat at Dahlan Baljut underscored the need for even greater discipline, stricter organization, and a more robust understanding of large-scale military strategy. It taught him that charisma and personal bravery, while essential, were not enough to overcome superior numbers or entrenched opposition. He needed to professionalize his fighting force, move beyond the loose tribal levies, and create a truly unified army capable of executing complex maneuvers. It also solidified his resolve. Rather than being broken by the loss, he became even more determined, absorbing the lessons of defeat and planning for future triumphs. Historians still argue whether the Battle of Dahlan Baljut was a true military defeat for Temujin, or more of a strategic withdrawal designed to preserve his forces for future engagements. However, what is clear is that this engagement, regardless of its precise outcome, was a critical learning experience for the young leader. It forced him to adapt, to innovate, and to refine his approach to warfare and leadership. He understood that to overcome the fragmented and often self-serving nature of tribal politics, he needed to offer something fundamentally different, something more compelling than the old ways. This early test of fire hardened his resolve and prepared him for the far greater conflicts that lay ahead, shaping the very tactics and strategies that would eventually conquer half the known world. It's almost as if every setback was just another step on the ladder to ultimate success, isn't it? The sting of the setback at Dahlan Baljut, rather than crushing Temujin's spirit, ignited an even fiercer resolve within him. He understood with crystal clarity that the fragmented internecine squabbles of the various Mongol tribes were a self-defeating cycle, draining their strength and leaving them vulnerable to external threats and internal strife. His vision, born from personal hardship and a deep understanding of the steppe's brutal logic, was to forge these disparate, often warring clans into a single, cohesive entity. This section will explore the arduous process of unifying the tribes, a monumental undertaking that required not only military genius, but also profound political skill and an almost messianic conviction. Temujin recognized that simply defeating his enemies on the battlefield wasn't enough. He needed to absorb them, to integrate them into his growing power structure, and to offer them a compelling reason to abandon their old loyalties for a new, unified identity. His approach was remarkably sophisticated for its time. While he could be utterly ruthless to those who resisted him, he also offered mercy and opportunity to those who surrendered willingly. He made it a policy to spare common soldiers and even minor nobles of defeated tribes, offering them a place within his own forces rather than slaughtering them or enslaving them outright. This unconventional leniency earned him a reputation not just as a fearsome warrior, but as a leader who could provide stability and a future. One of his most significant triumphs during this period was the defeat of the Tatars, the very tribe who had poisoned his father, Yesugei. This campaign was not merely about revenge, though that certainly played a part. It was a strategic move to eliminate a persistent threat and to demonstrate his unwavering resolve. The Tatars, long a powerful and troublesome force, were systematically subdued. Following their defeat, Temüjin made a controversial yet ultimately pragmatic decision to order the execution of all Tatar males taller than a wagon wheel. This chilling act, though brutal, was meant to eradicate a deep-seated enmity and prevent future rebellions, sending a clear message about the consequences of perpetual defiance. It was a harsh lesson, certainly, but in the context of the unforgiving steppe, it was seen by many as a necessary step towards lasting peace. Another critical struggle involved the Karits and their Khan, Togrul, Temüjin's former Anda and adoptive father. The relationship, once strong, began to sour as Togrul grew wary of Temüjin's rise in power and his increasingly independent actions. Instigated by Jamuka and other rivals who sought to sow discord, Togrul eventually turned against Temüjin, leading to another major conflict. The ensuing battles were fiercely contested as both leaders commanded skilled forces. However, Temüjin, utilizing superior tactics, intelligence gathering, and the unwavering loyalty of his inner circle, eventually triumphed. Togrul was defeated and fled, eventually dying a miserable death at the hands of border guards. This victory was monumental, as it removed one of the last major obstacles to his complete domination of the central Mongolian plateau. Temüjin's growing reputation for both military brilliance and shrewd statesmanship attracted more and more followers. Disgruntled members of other tribes, seeing the writing on the wall, defected to his side. He promoted individuals based on their talent and loyalty, rather than their tribal affiliation or aristocratic lineage, a radical concept that resonated deeply with the common warrior. He incorporated conquered peoples directly into his army, often placing them under the command of his own trusted generals, effectively breaking down old tribal allegiances and forging a new, unified Mongol identity. Historians still argue whether Temüjin's policy of integrating conquered peoples was purely pragmatic, aimed at strengthening his forces, or if it also stemmed from a genuine belief in a shared destiny for all peoples of the steppe under his rule. Whatever the motivation, his methods proved incredibly effective. By 1206, after decades of relentless campaigning, strategic alliances, and crucial betrayals, Temüjin had achieved the unthinkable. He had unified all the major nomadic tribes of the Mongolian plateau, from the forests to the vast grasslands. The stage was now set for the next, even more audacious, chapter of his life. With the vast, windswept Mongolian steppes finally quieted under his authority, Temüjin had achieved what generations of chieftains before him could only dream of: the unification of the disparate, often warring nomadic tribes. This monumental accomplishment demanded formal recognition, a moment to solidify his unprecedented power and set the course for what was to come. This momentous occasion took place in 1206 at a grand assembly known as the Kurultai. The Kurultai was not merely a meeting, it was a deeply symbolic gathering, a traditional Mongol council where important decisions were made, leaders were chosen, and policies were debated. But this Kurultai was different. It was an unprecedented convocation, drawing together representatives from every corner of the now unified Mongol realm, chieftains, warriors, and elders, all gathered in one vast encampment. The air would have crackled with anticipation, a mix of awe, trepidation, and perhaps a touch of apprehension for what this new era might bring. Imagine thousands of yurts spread across the endless plain, the lowing of herds, the smell of wood smoke, and the murmur of countless voices, all converging on a single point of power. At this historic assembly, Temüjin, already the undisputed leader in practice, was formally proclaimed Genghis Khan. The title itself is steeped in meaning and has been subject to much scholarly debate. While traditionally translated as universal ruler or oceanic Khan, its precise etymology and deeper significance are still explored by linguists and historians. Some theories suggest it implies fierce or mighty ruler, drawing from ancient Turkic or Mongolian roots. Regardless of the exact translation, the message was clear. Temüjin was no longer just a tribal chieftain. He was the supreme, divinely ordained leader of all the Mongols, destined to rule a vast domain. He had transcended the tribal politics that had defined his youth and had forged a new identity, not just for himself, but for his people. The ceremony of his enthronement would have been steeped in ancient shamanistic rituals, invoking the blessing of Tengri, the eternal blue sky, the supreme deity of the Mongols. This divine sanction was crucial, imbuing his rule with spiritual legitimacy in the eyes of his followers. It wasn't just about military might, it was about destiny, about a chosen leader guiding his people. From this point forward, Temüjin ceased to be merely Temüjin, the son of Yesugei. He became Genghis Khan, a title that would reverberate through history for centuries to come, striking fear into the hearts of his enemies and inspiring unwavering loyalty in his followers. This elevation marked a profound transformation for the Mongol people. No longer would they be a collection of feuding tribes, perpetually raiding each other. Under Genghis Khan, they were a unified nation, a single entity with a common purpose and a shared destiny. This newfound unity was not just a theoretical concept. It was immediately followed by a series of decrees and reforms that laid the groundwork for the vast empire that was soon to emerge. Genghis Khan understood that sustained power required more than just military victories. It required a coherent system of governance, law, and administration. He began to organize his people, not along traditional tribal lines, but into military units and administrative districts loyal directly to him. This structural change was revolutionary, breaking down the old allegiances that had caused so much internal strife. He introduced a new legal code, the Yasa, or Yasak, which, though its full text is lost to time, is known to have governed all aspects of Mongol life, from military conduct to civil disputes, emphasizing loyalty, discipline, and mutual support. It also enshrined principles of religious tolerance, a remarkably forward-thinking concept for the era. Historians still argue whether the Yasa was a fully codified legal system or a set of oral decrees and principles that were developed and expanded over time. However, its impact on the Mongol society and its governance was undeniably profound. The Kurultai of 1206 was not just the crowning of a king, it was the birth of an empire. With the Mongol nation unified and a clear leader at its helm, the previously unfocused energy of the steppe warriors was now channeled towards a singular, audacious goal: expansion. Genghis Khan had brought order to his people, and now he looked beyond the horizons of the steppe towards the rich, settled lands that lay beyond. The world, utterly unaware, was about to meet its new master, forged in the crucible of hardship and elevated by the will of his people and the blessings of the eternal blue sky. The proclamation of Genghis Khan at the Kurultai of 1206 was not simply a ceremonial elevation. It was the definitive moment that transformed a collection of nomadic tribes into a formidable, unified force. But a unified force, no matter how disciplined, needs a framework to operate, a set of rules and systems that transcend individual loyalties. Genghis Khan understood this implicitly, and immediately after his enthronement, he embarked upon a series of profound reforms and organization that would prove to be the bedrock of his astonishing conquests and the longevity of his empire. These weren't mere tweaks. They were a complete reimagining of nomadic society, a blend of ancient tradition and audacious innovation. Foremost among his reforms was the complete restructuring of the Mongol military. He abolished the old tribal levies, which were often unreliable and prone to internal feuding, replacing them with a merit-based system of decimal organization. Every 10 men formed an arban, 10 arbans formed a jagun, 100, 10 jaguns formed a mingan, 1,000, and 10 mingans formed a tumen, 10,000. This seemingly simple system was revolutionary. It broke down traditional tribal loyalties, ensuring that warriors from different clans served alongside each other, fostering a new, unified Mongol identity. Command was given based on proven ability and loyalty to the Khan, not on aristocratic birthright. This meant that a common soldier could rise through the ranks based purely on their skill and bravery, a concept almost unheard of in the rigid class structures of most contemporary societies. It was a bit like creating a modern, professional army in an age of feudal militias, and it worked wonders. The training and discipline of this new army were rigorous. Every Mongol male, from a young age, was trained to ride and shoot a bow with exceptional skill, becoming an extension of their horse. Their horsemanship was legendary, allowing them to cover vast distances with incredible speed, living off their horse's milk and blood if necessary. They perfected tactics like the feigned retreat, luring enemies into traps before turning to unleash a devastating volley of arrows. This highly mobile, flexible, and disciplined fighting force was unlike anything the settled world had ever encountered, capable of lightning-fast maneuvers and sustained campaigns. Beyond the military, Genghis Khan also initiated crucial administrative reforms. He created a sophisticated system of written communication, adapting the Uyghur script for the Mongolian language. This was a monumental step, allowing for efficient administration, the recording of laws, and the transmission of orders across the vast distances of the steppe. Imagine trying to run an empire by shouting across plains. It's just not practical. This written language facilitated diplomacy, record-keeping, and the overall governance of his rapidly expanding domain. He also established a system of civil administration, appointing loyal officials to oversee various aspects of the nascent empire, from tax collection to justice. The Yasa, as mentioned before, served as the legal and moral code for his empire, emphasizing justice, loyalty, discipline, and communal responsibility. It strictly forbade theft, abduction, and betrayal, crimes that had plagued nomadic society for centuries. It also promoted religious tolerance, allowing people to practice their own faiths freely as long as they remained loyal to the Khan. This policy was not merely benevolent, it was pragmatic, preventing internal strife and allowing for the peaceful integration of diverse peoples into his empire. Another ingenious innovation was the YAM, or postal relay system. This network of relay stations, stocked with fresh horses and provisions, allowed for the rapid transmission of messages and official documents across the entire empire. It was an ancient version of a high-speed internet connection, ensuring that Genghis Khan could maintain tight control and receive intelligence from the furthest reaches of his domain. This logistical marvel was crucial for coordinating vast armies and administering a truly enormous territory. Historians still argue whether the YAM system was a completely original Mongol invention or an adaptation of existing postal systems from conquered territories, but its scale and efficiency under the Mongols were certainly unprecedented. These reforms weren't just about efficiency, they were about creating a unified identity, a sense of belonging to something larger than the individual tribe. Genghis Khan deliberately broke down old tribal hierarchies and replaced them with a new order based on merit and loyalty to the Khan. This revolutionary approach, born from his own experiences of abandonment and betrayal, transformed the Mongols from a collection of fractious tribes into a disciplined, unstoppable force poised to look beyond the steppe. The groundwork had been laid, the engine was tuned, and now it was time for the true expansion to begin. With the Mongol nation unified, their military reformed, and a functional administrative system in place, Genghis Khan turned his gaze outward. The rich, settled civilizations bordering the steppe, long a source of both envy and potential plunder, now presented themselves as irresistible targets for his disciplined and ambitious warriors. The first major step in this grand expansion was the series of campaigns against the Western Shia, also known as the Tanguts. This conflict, beginning around 1209, served as a crucial proving ground for the newly forged Mongol war machine. The Western Shia was a powerful, well-established kingdom located to the south of Mongolia, encompassing parts of modern-day Ningxia, Gansu, and Shanxi provinces in China. They were ethnically Tangut, a Tibeto-Burman people, and had a sophisticated culture, impressive fortifications, and a standing army. For centuries, they had been a significant regional power, often clashing with the Song dynasty to their south and various nomadic groups to their north. In short, they were no pushovers. They were a formidable opponent, representing the kind of settled, fortified civilization the Mongols would need to overcome to achieve true imperial expansion. Genghis Khan's initial motivation for attacking the Western Shia was likely multifaceted. It could have been a strategic move to secure his western flank before engaging the more powerful Jin dynasty to the east. It was also an opportunity to test the cohesion and effectiveness of his newly unified army against a strong, walled adversary. Furthermore, the Tanguts controlled lucrative trade routes, including parts of the Silk Road, and their rich agricultural lands offered valuable resources. Conquering them would provide not only wealth, but also strategic depth and a pathway to further conquests. It's a bit like when a video game character needs to complete a tutorial level before taking on the final boss. The Tanguts were a well-fortified, challenging tutorial. The campaigns against the Western Sia were not a single, swift conquest, but a series of expeditions over several years. The Mongols, accustomed to swift raids and open-field battles on the steppe, quickly encountered the challenges of siege warfare. Walled cities presented a different kind of obstacle, requiring engineers, siege engines, and a patient, methodical approach that was initially alien to their nomadic instincts. However, Genghis Khan and his commanders were quick learners. They adapted their tactics, incorporated captured engineers and their knowledge, and developed increasingly sophisticated methods for breaching fortifications. They employed classic siege techniques, such as diverting rivers to flood cities or building massive earthen ramps to scale walls. Their approach was often brutal but effective. When a city resisted fiercely, the Mongols, upon finally breaking through, would often unleash a horrific slaughter to demoralize other potential resistors. This was a deliberate policy of terror designed to encourage rapid surrender and minimize future resistance. Yet they also understood the value of preserving infrastructure and skilled laborers, and often spared populations that surrendered quickly. It was a complex and chilling blend of destruction and pragmatism. The Tanguts, despite their initial resilience, were eventually overwhelmed by the relentless Mongol pressure. Their cities fell one by one, their armies were defeated in the field, and their economy was crippled. While the Western Sia Kingdom would continue to exist as a vassal state for some years, its power was irrevocably broken, and it was forced to pay tribute and provide troops to the Mongol army. This conquest provided the Mongols with invaluable experience in fighting settled empires, mastering siege warfare, and integrating conquered populations into their military and administrative structures. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan's ultimate intention with the Western Sia was always complete annihilation, or if it evolved over time based on their resistance. Nevertheless, this first significant external conquest demonstrated the incredible military potential of the unified Mongols and set the precedent for the even grander campaigns that would soon follow against the mighty Jin dynasty, a power far greater and more entrenched than the Tanguts. With the Western Xia humbled and subjugated, Genghis Khan had not only secured his western flank, but had also honed his army's skills in siege warfare and the art of conquering settled civilizations. The Mongols, once purely nomadic warriors, were now masters of combined arms, capable of both swift cavalry maneuvers and patient, devastating sieges. This newfound proficiency set the stage for their most audacious undertaking yet, the conquest of the Jin dynasty, Part 1. This would be no mere raid. It was a full-scale invasion of one of the most powerful and sophisticated empires in the world. The Jin dynasty, ruled by the Jurchen people, controlled much of northern China, including the fertile Yellow River Plains and numerous populous cities. They possessed a vast standing army, sophisticated siege technology, and immense economic resources. Their capital, Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing, was a magnificent, heavily fortified city, a symbol of their power and wealth. For centuries, the Jin had been a dominant force, viewing the nomadic tribes to their north with a mixture of disdain and apprehension, often resorting to building defensive walls, like parts of what would later become the Great Wall, and playing tribal groups against each other. Attacking the Jin was akin to a modern-day superpower deciding to invade another equally powerful nation. It was a gamble of colossal proportions. Genghis Khan's motivations for this monumental campaign, which began around 1211, were complex. There was certainly the lure of immense wealth, the fertile lands, and the advanced technologies of China. But there was also a deeply ingrained historical resentment. The Jin had historically subjugated and humiliated various nomadic groups, including the ancestors of the Mongols. They had demanded tribute, intervened in steppe politics, and even assassinated tribal leaders. For Genghis Khan, this invasion was not just about conquest. It was about reversing generations of humiliation and establishing Mongol supremacy. It was payback, with interest, for every slight and every indignity. The initial phase of the campaign saw the Mongol armies pouring across the Jin border, utilizing their signature speed and mobility to bypass and isolate fortified positions. While the Jin had a large army, its distribution across a vast territory meant that no single force could match the concentrated might of the Mongol Tumans. The Mongol cavalry, swift as the wind, swept through the countryside, disrupting communications, cutting off supply lines, and spreading terror. Peasants fled in droves, creating a humanitarian crisis that further destabilized the Jin war effort. One of the early challenges for the Mongols was penetrating the Jin's formidable defensive lines, particularly the various sections of what they called the Jin Wall, an extension of earlier Chinese fortifications. These walls, though not continuous, presented significant obstacles. However, the Mongols found ways to bypass or breach them, often using their agility to find weaknesses, or simply overwhelming key passes. Their primary strategy was not to engage in head-on assaults against every fortification, but to isolate, encircle, and then systematically reduce the Jin strongholds. They also excelled at psychological warfare, using their reputation for brutality to encourage surrender before a single arrow was fired. The early engagements were characterized by a series of pitched battles in the open plains, where the Mongol cavalry's superior horsemanship, archery, and tactical coordination proved devastating against the more conventional Jin armies. Jin commanders, often hampered by internal rivalries and a reluctance to fully commit their forces, found themselves outmaneuvered and overwhelmed. The Mongols, with their unified command and unyielding discipline, struck swiftly and mercilessly. Genghis Khan, leading from the front, yet always with a strategic overview, adapted his tactics to the larger scale of warfare, demonstrating an unparalleled ability to coordinate multiple armies across vast distances. This first phase of the Jin campaign was a brutal introduction for China to the rising power of the Mongols, a hint of the storm that was gathering on their northern frontier. The Jin, despite their vast resources, were beginning to realize that they faced an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered. The initial successes against the Jin dynasty, marked by the rapid penetration of their northern defenses and the defeat of several field armies, merely set the stage for the protracted and arduous phase of the conquest of Jin dynasty. Part 2. The Jin, despite their early setbacks, were a vast and resilient empire, and their major cities presented a formidable challenge, requiring the Mongols to continually adapt and refine their siege warfare capabilities. This wasn't a quick smash and grab. It was a grueling, multi-year campaign that tested the limits of Mongol endurance and ingenuity. As the Mongol armies pushed deeper into Jin territory, they encountered cities far grander and more heavily fortified than anything they had seen in western Xia. These cities had boasted massive walls, deep moats, and well-stocked garrisons designed to withstand prolonged sieges. The Mongols, whose initial strength lay in their mobility and open-field tactics, quickly realized they needed to become masters of attrition and engineering. This meant not just bringing their own rudimentary siege equipment, but actively learning from and incorporating the more advanced techniques of the Chinese themselves. They employed captured engineers, forced local populations into labor battalions to build siege ramps and trenches, and adapted Chinese siege engines, sometimes improving upon them. It's almost as if they were running a very aggressive, destructive, and ultimately successful on-the-job training program for conquest. The siege of Zhongdu, the Jin capital, was a prime example of this evolving strategy. It was a monumental undertaking, a city of immense size and population, defended by a large, well-equipped army. Genghis Khan, rather than attempting a direct, costly assault, chose a more methodical approach. He laid a long siege, starving the city into submission, disrupting its supply lines, and constantly probing its defenses. While the main Mongol armies would move on to conquer other areas, a contingent would be left to maintain the blockade, gradually weakening the city from within. The defenders, trapped within their walls, faced not just the Mongols, but also disease and famine, which often proved to be more lethal than direct combat. The campaign against the Jin was also marked by a brutal psychological component. The Mongols, having demonstrated their willingness to commit widespread destruction and slaughter in cities that resisted fiercely, cultivated a terrifying reputation. This policy was designed to break the will of potential defenders before they even considered resistance. The chilling message was clear: surrender quickly, and you might live. Resist, and your city and its inhabitants face annihilation. This often led to cities opening their gates, rather than enduring a prolonged and hopeless siege, thus saving Mongol lives and resources, while simultaneously terrifying the surrounding region. Despite the Mongols' ferocity, the Jin did not collapse overnight. They mounted desperate counterattacks, tried to play diplomatic games, and even shifted their capital further south to Kaifeng to escape the direct threat. However, their internal divisions, their inability to unite fully against the external threat, and the sheer relentless pressure of the Mongols ultimately sealed their fate. Genghis Khan himself did not live to see the complete fall of the Jin dynasty, which would eventually be conquered by his successor, Ogedei Khan, in 1234. However, it was Genghis Khan who laid the groundwork, breaking the back of Jin power and ensuring their eventual collapse. This prolonged struggle against the Jin taught the Mongols invaluable lessons about conquering and administering large, settled empires. It forced them to develop sophisticated logistical networks, to manage vast amounts of plunder, and to integrate foreign populations and technologies into their war machine. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan had a detailed, long-term plan for the conquest of China from the very beginning, or if his strategy evolved opportunistically as he gained experience and resources. Regardless, the Jin campaigns were a crucial step in the transformation of the Mongol Empire from a regional power to a continental hegemon, setting the stage for even grander ambitions. As the relentless pressure on the Jin dynasty continued, with cities falling and their power eroding, Genghis Khan's gaze, ever expansive, turned westward. The vast, wealthy lands of Central Asia, particularly the flourishing Khwarezmian Empire, presented an irresistible target, not just for plunder, but as a strategic gateway to the even richer lands beyond. This conflict was not initially sought by the Mongols. Rather, it was born out of a series of diplomatic blunders and brutal actions by the Khwarezmian Shah, igniting a devastating war that would reshape the geography of the Middle East and send shockwaves across the known world. The Khwarezmian Empire was a formidable power, stretching across Persia, Central Asia, and parts of Afghanistan, with its capital at Gurganj. It was a rich and cultured realm, boasting magnificent cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Urgench, all centers of trade, learning, and immense wealth. Its ruler, Shah Muhammad II, commanded a vast and diverse army, consisting of various ethnic groups and tribal levies, including formidable cavalry and skilled archers. From a purely military standpoint, the Khwarezmian Empire seemed like a peer to the Jin dynasty, a significant and well-defended power. Genghis Khan, ever the pragmatist, initially sought a peaceful relationship with the Khwarezmian Empire. He envisioned a mutually beneficial trade agreement, opening up the lucrative Silk Road routes that passed through Khwarezmian territory, allowing Mongol goods to flow westward and bringing desirable goods and technologies back to the steppe. In 1218, he dispatched a large caravan of merchants, accompanied by a small diplomatic escort, towards the Khwarezmian lands. This was a direct overture of peace and commerce, a clear signal of his intentions. However, Shah Muhammad II, perhaps viewing the Mongols as unsophisticated barbarians or underestimating their true power, made a series of catastrophic miscalculations. The governor of Otrar, a Khwarezmian city, detained the Mongol caravan, accusing the merchants of being spies. He then, without the Shah's explicit order, but with his tacit approval, executed all the merchants and confiscated their goods. This was a grave insult, a blatant violation of diplomatic immunity, and a direct challenge to Genghis Khan's authority and reputation. Imagine if a modern-day ambassador were summarily executed. It would be an immediate cause for war, wouldn't it? Genghis Khan, remarkably, still attempted to de-escalate the situation. He sent a second embassy, this time composed of 3 envoys, to demand an explanation and the extradition of the offending governor. Shah Muhammad II's response was not only dismissive, but profoundly insulting. He executed the chief Mongol envoy and publicly humiliated the others by shaving their beards. This act, deeply offensive to Mongol customs was the final, unforgivable insult. For Genghis Khan, whose authority rested on his reputation for absolute justice and swift retribution, this was an unbearable affront. The execution of his envoy was a direct challenge to his honor and the inviolability of his messengers, a sacred tenet in nomadic tradition. This diplomatic catastrophe transformed Genghis Khan's peaceful intentions into a burning desire for vengeance. He perceived the Shah's actions not just as an insult to himself, but as a direct challenge to the very foundation of Mongol power. He reportedly gathered his generals, consulted with his shamans, and declared a holy war, stating that Tengri, the eternal blue sky, had willed this conflict. The sheer brutality of the Shah's actions guaranteed that the Mongol response would be equally, if not more, brutal. This wasn't going to be a mere punitive raid. It was going to be an invasion of unprecedented scale and ferocity, aimed at the utter destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire. The world, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon, was about to witness the true, terrifying might of Genghis Khan's wrath. The unpardonable insult from Shah Muhammad II of Khwarezm, culminating in the execution of Genghis Khan's envoy, sealed the fate of the Khwarezmian Empire. What began as a potential trade alliance swiftly escalated into a declaration of total war, an invasion of a scale and ferocity previously unseen. In 1219, Genghis Khan personally led the main Mongol forces, numbering perhaps 100,000 to 150,000 warriors, though some historical estimates push that number even higher, across the vast Central Asian steppes towards the rich Khwarezmian heartland. This was the invasion of Khwarezm Part 1, a campaign that would redefine the brutal efficiency of warfare. The invasion itself was a logistical marvel, a testament to the organizational genius that Genghis Khan had instilled in his armies. Moving such a vast host across arid lands, complete with their horses, baggage, and supply train, required meticulous planning. The Mongols utilized their well-established yam system, setting up supply depots and relay points along their route, ensuring their forces remained swift and well-provisioned. They moved with a speed that utterly bewildered their enemies, covering distances in days that would take traditional armies weeks. Shah Muhammad II, despite commanding a larger overall army, made a critical strategic error. Instead of concentrating his forces to meet the Mongols in a decisive pitched battle, he dispersed his troops into garrisons across his major cities. He believed that the Mongols, being primarily cavalry, would be unable to overcome his heavily fortified urban centers, and that his scattered forces could then harass and wear down the invaders. This decision proved to be a fatal miscalculation. It allowed the Mongols to employ their preferred tactic of isolating and destroying enemy forces piecemeal, never having to face the full strength of the Khwarezmian army at once. It's a bit like playing a game of chess where your opponent scatters all their pieces, leaving them vulnerable to a coordinated attack. Genghis Khan employed a brilliant strategy of multi-pronged attacks, sending separate tumens, units of 10,000 men, to strike different cities simultaneously or to outflank major Khwarezmian defensive positions. He also utilized deception, a hallmark of his military approach, sending smaller forces to feign attacks in one direction, while the main army swept in from another, often unexpected direction. This constant uncertainty and the sheer speed of their movements sowed confusion and panic among the Khwarezmian defenders. One of the first major objectives was the city of Otrar, whose governor, Inalchuk, had been responsible for the massacre of the Mongol merchants. Genghis Khan sent a portion of his army, led by his sons Jochi and Chagatai, to besiege the city. The siege of Otrar was long and bloody, lasting for several months, highlighting the Khwarezmians' stubborn defense and the Mongols' growing mastery of siege warfare. They employed every tactic: sapping, bombardment with catapults, and relentless assaults. The fall of Otrar was particularly brutal, with its inhabitants massacred and the city razed, a chilling message delivered to the rest of the empire. Inalchuk himself was captured and, according to some accounts, executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a grim retribution for his greed. The invasion was not just a military campaign, it was a psychological war. The news of Mongol atrocities in one city spread like wildfire to the next, often leading to panic and a weakened will to resist. The fear they instilled was a weapon as potent as their arrows and swords. Historians still argue whether the extreme brutality exhibited by the Mongols in Khwarezm was solely a calculated policy of terror, or if it was also fueled by a genuine desire for vengeance for the immense insult they had suffered. Whatever the precise blend of motivations, the results were devastating, and the once flourishing cities of Central Asia were about to face a wrath unlike any they had ever known. The first phase of the invasion had begun, and the Khwarezmian Empire was already reeling. With Otrar's grim fate serving as a terrifying harbinger, the Mongol invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire surged forward, unleashing a wave of destruction that would forever alter the landscape of Central Asia. The strategy of Shah Muhammad II, scattering his forces into garrisons, played directly into Genghis Khan's hands, allowing the Mongols to systematically isolate and dismantle the great urban centers one by one. This period marked the invasions of Khwarezm Part 2, Cities Fall, a testament to the Mongols' evolving siegecraft and their unyielding resolve. Following Otrar, the magnificent city of Bukhara, a renowned center of Islamic scholarship and trade, found itself in the Mongol crosshairs. Unlike Otrar, Bukhara's defenders did not put up a prolonged resistance. Perhaps intimidated by the tales from the east, or perhaps seeing the futility of resistance against such overwhelming force, many of the city's elites and clergy surrendered relatively quickly. Genghis Khan entered Bukhara, and in a remarkably calm, almost pedagogical manner, he addressed the assembled citizens from the city's main mosque, explaining his mission as a punishment from God for their Shah's transgressions. He then permitted his troops to plunder the city, but the overall destruction was less severe than in Otrar, with much of the city's infrastructure and population eventually spared after a period of terror. This nuanced approach, a blend of punitive action and pragmatic preservation, showcased Genghis Khan's strategic mind. He knew when to unleash wrath and when to show a degree of restraint. The true fury of the Mongol war machine was then unleashed upon Samarkand, the Shah's glittering capital and one of the largest and most prosperous cities in the world. Samarkand boasted a massive population and reputedly possessed one of the strongest garrisons in the Khwarezmian Empire, numbering well over 100,000 men. The Shah himself had briefly been there before fleeing west. The Mongols encircled the city, employing massive catapults, trebuchets, and other siege engines, some possibly adapted or improved from Chinese designs. They utilized prisoners of war and conscripted local populations as human shields and labor for siege works, a particularly brutal but effective tactic. The defenders of Samarkand fought fiercely for several days, but the sheer numerical superiority of the Mongol siege forces, combined with their relentless attacks and clever use of psychological warfare, eventually broke their will. When the walls were breached, the ensuing sack of Samarkand was catastrophic. The city was largely razed, its populace massacred, and its vast wealth plundered. It was a stark example of Mongol retribution for prolonged resistance. The campaigns against these major Khwarezmian cities also highlighted a fascinating aspect of Mongol military logistics: their remarkable ability to sustain prolonged operations far from their traditional homelands. They did this by living off the land, plundering local resources, and meticulously organizing supply lines through the vast territories they conquered. They also integrated captured artisans, engineers, and even soldiers into their ranks, transforming the assets of their enemies into strengths for themselves. This constant assimilation of resources and knowledge was a key factor in their success. While these major cities fell, Shah Muhammad II, the architect of this disaster, was in full flight. He had abandoned his capital and his armies, desperately trying to evade the Mongol pursuit. This desertion further demoralized his remaining forces and demonstrated the fatal flaw in his strategy. Historians still argue whether Shah Muhammad's decision to scatter his forces was a genuine strategic blunder or an act of desperate improvisation given the overwhelming Mongol threat. Regardless, it proved to be the undoing of his empire. The fall of Bukhara and Samarkand, two jewels of the Islamic world, sent shivers of fear and despair throughout the Middle East and beyond. The Mongols were not just invaders, they were an apocalyptic force, sweeping away centuries of civilization with terrifying speed and efficiency, leaving behind a trail of desolation and shattered empires. Their next target was the elusive Shah himself, and the pursuit would lead them even further west, into lands previously untouched by their thundering hooves. With the heartland of the Khwarezmian Empire in ruins and its magnificent cities reduced to ash or subjugation, Genghis Khan had accomplished the impossible. Yet one crucial piece remained: the elusive Shah Muhammad II, the very man whose arrogance and folly had ignited this devastating war. Genghis Khan understood that as long as the Shah remained at large, he represented a potential rallying point for resistance, a symbol of lingering defiance. Thus began a relentless and legendary pursuit, a testament to the Mongol army's unparalleled endurance and strategic determination. This section details the pursuit of Shah Muhammad II, a chase that spanned vast distances and showcased the extraordinary capabilities of the Mongol light cavalry. Shah Muhammad II, a man of immense power, just months before, was now a hunted fugitive. He fled westward, abandoning his capital and his people, desperately seeking refuge. He moved from city to city, often just ahead of the Mongol vanguard, hoping to raise new armies or find a safe haven. This flight itself, a monarch abandoning his realm, severely damaged his legitimacy and further demoralized his remaining supporters. It's almost comically tragic, isn't it? One moment you're an emperor, the next you're basically couch surfing across your shattered kingdom. Genghis Khan entrusted this critical task of hunting down the Shah to two of his most brilliant and relentless generals, Subutai and Jebe. These two commanders were arguably the finest military minds of their era, masters of reconnaissance, long-distance raiding, and psychological warfare. They were given a relatively small but highly mobile force, perhaps around 20,000 cavalrymen, with the simple yet daunting order: find the Shah, dead or alive. This detachment was not meant for large-scale conquest, but for swift, surgical strikes and relentless pursuit. Subutai and Jebe embarked on a dizzying chase that covered thousands of miles across Persia, through the Caucasus, and into Eastern Europe. They demonstrated incredible logistical planning, living off the land, employing local guides, and using the Yam system to transmit intelligence back to Genghis Khan. Their pace was astounding, often covering over 100 kilometers a day, far outstripping the Shah's ability to escape or organize any meaningful defense. They struck cities where the Shah had recently been, causing panic and leaving a trail of destruction that further solidified the Mongol reputation for inescapable retribution. The Shah's flight became increasingly desperate. He sought refuge on islands in the Caspian Sea, believing he would be safe from the horsemen who were seemingly everywhere. However, even there, the Mongols found ways to reach him. Though they were not typically seafaring, they reportedly found local boats or adapted their tactics to pursue him across water, demonstrating their terrifying adaptability. The pressure was relentless. The Shah could find no peace, no moment of respite from the constant threat of capture. Ultimately, Shah Muhammad II's desperate flight ended not by direct capture by the Mongols, but by a more ignominious fate. He sought refuge on a small island in the Caspian Sea, suffering from pleurisy and utterly broken in spirit. He died there in December 1220, or early 1221, destitute and abandoned, a once mighty emperor, reduced to nothing by the relentless pursuit of a vengeful Khan. His death, while not a direct military victory, was a profound psychological victory for Genghis Khan, signaling the complete destruction of the Khwarezmian ruling dynasty and removing any lingering hope of organized resistance. The pursuit of Shah Muhammad II by Subutai and Jebe was more than just a hunt for a single man. It served as a massive reconnaissance mission, gathering invaluable intelligence about the lands to the west, including Georgia, Armenia, and the various Rus' principalities. This information would prove crucial for future Mongol expansion. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan's primary objective for sending Subutai and Jebe so far west was purely to pursue the Shah, or if it was always intended as a deeper scouting mission for future conquests. Whatever the initial intent, the sheer audacity and success of this long-distance pursuit cemented the legends of Subutai and Jebe as military strategists of unparalleled skill, capable of operating independently and effectively across immense distances. The stage was now set for their even more audacious foray into Eastern Europe. While Genghis Khan consolidated his grip on the shattered remnants of the Khwarezmian Empire, organizing its new administration and dealing with lingering pockets of resistance. The two incomparable generals, Subutai and Jebe, were not idle. Having relentlessly pursued Shah Muhammad II to his miserable end on a Caspian Sea island, their orders from Genghis Khan were to continue west, to scout the lands beyond, and to return home via the northern steppes. What followed was one of the most astonishing military expeditions in history, a grand reconnaissance in force that would shock the emerging powers of Eastern Europe. This section details Subutai and Jebe's grand raid, an epic journey of conquest and discovery that profoundly influenced future Mongol strategy. With a relatively small force, perhaps 20,000 horsemen, they swept through northern Persia, engaging and defeating various local rulers and raiding their territories. Their strategy remained consistent: rapid movement, overwhelming surprise, and the brutal efficiency that had become the Mongol trademark. They entered the Caucasus region, a mountainous land dotted with powerful kingdoms like Georgia and Armenia. These Christian kingdoms, accustomed to fighting each other and the Seljuk Turks, were utterly unprepared for the speed and ferocity of the Mongol onslaught. Subutai and Jebe methodically defeated their armies, often employing their feigned retreat tactics to devastating effect, luring the heavily armored Georgian knights into traps where they were then annihilated by volleys of arrows. It's almost as if the Mongol generals possessed a secret cheat code for warfare, effortlessly dispatching any and all opponents. Their advance then took them through the Derbent Pass, a narrow gateway between the Caucasus Mountains and the Caspian Sea, famously known as the Caspian Gates. This strategic bottleneck had historically been impenetrable, but the Mongols, with their determination, found a way through. Emerging onto the vast Pontic steppe, they encountered the nomadic Cumans, also known as Kipchaks, Turkic peoples who controlled this immense grassland. The Cumans, realizing the overwhelming power of the Mongols, sought assistance from the Rus's princes, their traditional rivals to the north. This appeal led to a temporary, uneasy alliance between the Cumans and a coalition of Rus's principalities, including Kiev and Galicia, who, despite their frequent squabbles, understood the existential threat posed by these mysterious, unstoppable invaders from the east. The decisive engagement of this incredible expedition was the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223. The combined Cuman-Russ's army, significantly larger than the Mongol force, advanced confidently. However, the Russ's princes were notoriously disunited, often arguing amongst themselves and lacking a unified command. Subutai and Jebe, ever the masters of psychological warfare and tactical deception, exploited these divisions. They feigned a retreat for several days, drawing the overconfident Rus forces further from their base and scattering their cohesion as different princes pursued at different speeds. When the Rus's army was sufficiently strung out and disorganized, the Mongols suddenly turned and attacked. The battle was a complete rout. The Rus princes, many of whom had despised each other more than they feared the Mongols, were utterly crushed. Several princes were captured and executed in a grim, ritualistic fashion, typically by being suffocated under a wooden platform upon which the Mongols celebrated their victory, ensuring no royal blood touched the ground. The victory at the Kalka River was a resounding triumph for Subutai and Jebe, a clear demonstration of Mongol military superiority even far from their home base. They had traversed immense distances, defeated multiple powerful adversaries, and gathered invaluable intelligence about the lands to the west. This expedition, though ostensibly a pursuit and reconnaissance mission, effectively opened the door for future Mongol incursions into Eastern Europe. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan specifically ordered Subutai and Jebe to raid so deeply into Rus's lands, or if the generals, given wide autonomy, simply seized the opportunity as it presented itself. Regardless, the information gleaned from this unprecedented raid proved critical for the later, full-scale Mongol invasions of Europe under Genghis Khan's successors. Having accomplished their mission and demonstrated the terrifying reach of Mongol power, Subutai and Jebe turned eastward, making their way back to rejoin the main body of the Mongol army. Their thunderous ride leaving a trail of shattered kingdoms and terrified rumors in their wake. After the grueling Khwarezmian campaign and the astonishingly far-flung expedition of Subutai and Jebe, Genghis Khan finally turned his attention homeward. By 1225, he had begun the journey back to the Mongolian steppe, bringing with him immense wealth, countless captives, and the hard-won experience of conquering vast, settled empires. This marked a period of consolidating his gains and preparing for his return to Mongolia and final campaigns, particularly one last, crucial engagement. The return journey was not merely a march home, it was a triumphant procession. The Khan and his generals had not only avenged the insult from the Khwarezmian Shah, but had also expanded the Mongol dominion to an unprecedented scale, reaching from the Pacific coast deep into Central Asia. Imagine the sight: vast columns of warriors, laden with plunder, driving herds of captured livestock, and leading long lines of artisans, engineers, and scholars who would be put to work for the Mongol Empire. This influx of wealth, knowledge, and skilled labor would significantly transform the Mongol heartland, bringing new technologies and resources to a society that had until recently been purely nomadic. Upon his return, Genghis Khan took stock of his empire. He had established a rudimentary but effective administration, overseen by his trusted lieutenants, but the sheer size of the conquered territories demanded further organization. He spent time with his family, his various wives, and his sons, preparing them for the immense responsibilities that would fall upon them after his eventual passing. He was, by this point, an aging warrior, though his mind remained as sharp and strategic as ever. Despite the vastness of his achievements, there remained one unresolved issue that gnawed at him, one final piece of business he felt compelled to conclude: the complete subjugation of the western Sais, Tanguts. Although they had been conquered and made into a vassal state earlier, the Tanguts had begun to show signs of defiance during the Khwarezmian campaign. They had refused to provide troops for Genghis Khan's western expeditions, a blatant act of insubordination and a clear violation of their vassalage agreement. For Genghis Khan, whose rule was built on absolute loyalty and swift retribution for betrayal, this defiance was unacceptable. He could not and would not tolerate insubordination on his borders, especially from a people he had already once brought to heel. It was a matter of principle, and more importantly, a matter of maintaining the absolute authority that held his vast empire together. Thus, in 1226, despite his advanced age and the weariness of decades of campaigning, Genghis Khan launched his final military expedition against the recalcitrant Western Shia. This campaign was not merely punitive, it was intended to be decisive, to utterly dismantle the Tangut state and remove them as a perpetual source of trouble. The Mongols systematically laid siege to the remaining Tangut strongholds, applying the brutal lessons they had learned in China and Khawarizm. Cities like Lingzhou and the capital, Yinchuan, faced the full wrath of the Mongol war machine. The Tanguts fought bravely, but they were no match for the seasoned and disciplined Mongol army, led by the Khan himself. Their forces were decimated, their cities were besieged, and their infrastructure was systematically destroyed. This final campaign was a testament to Genghis Khan's unyielding will and his commitment to completing what he started. He saw the subjugation of the Tanguts not just as a military necessity, but as a final act of securing his empire's borders and ensuring a stable legacy for his successors. Historians still argue about the precise motivations for this final campaign, with some emphasizing personal vengeance for the Tanguts' defiance, while others highlight the strategic necessity of eliminating any potential threat to Mongol control in the region. Regardless, it was a brutal, definitive end to the Tangut kingdom, serving as a final, terrible example of the consequences of challenging the universal ruler. The great Khan, having forged an empire and brought his final defiant foe to its knees, was now nearing the end of his extraordinary journey. Having led his final, devastating campaign against the defiant Western Shia, bringing that troublesome kingdom to its knees, Genghis Khan was, by 1227, an old man by the standards of the 13th century. His body, weathered by decades of incessant warfare, endless rides across the vast steppes, and the hardships of nomadic life, was finally succumbing to the inevitable. The exact circumstances surrounding Genghis Khan's death remain one of history's enduring mysteries, a subject of fascination and scholarly debate, fitting for a figure of such monumental impact. The most widely accepted accounts suggest that he fell ill during the final stages of the Western Sia campaign. The severe summer heat on the steppe, combined with the rigors of campaigning, likely exacerbated an existing condition or brought on a new ailment. Some sources mention he suffered an injury after falling from his horse, perhaps during a hunt, an activity he dearly loved even in his old age. Whether this fall was the direct cause of his demise, or merely weakened him further, making him susceptible to illness, is not entirely clear. It's a bit ironic, isn't it? A man who conquered empires with an army of horsemen might have been brought low by a simple tumble. Despite his failing health, Genghis Khan reportedly continued to issue commands and direct the final phases of the Tangut subjugation. His will was as iron-strong as ever, even as his physical strength waned. He was deeply concerned with ensuring the complete destruction of the Western Sia to prevent any future rebellion, a task he pushed his generals to complete even as he lay dying. This final brutal campaign was a testament to his unyielding resolve, a desire to leave no loose ends for his successors. He passed away in August 1227, during or immediately after the final defeat of the Western Sia. The precise location of his death is also a matter of conjecture, with various theories placing it somewhere in the Liupan Mountains in present-day Ningxia or Gansu provinces of China. Wherever it occurred, his death was kept a closely guarded secret for a considerable period. The Mongol armies, still operating in conquered territories, were ordered to maintain silence to prevent any uprisings or opportunistic attacks from their newly subjugated foes. This extraordinary secrecy ensured a smooth transition of power and allowed the Mongols to complete their final punitive actions against the Tanguts without interruption. The secrecy surrounding his burial was even more profound and enduring. Genghis Khan had reportedly expressed a desire to be buried without any markings, in a simple, unadorned grave, so that his resting place would remain unknown. His loyal followers carried out his wishes with an almost fanatical devotion. His body was transported back to the Mongolian heartland, likely to his ancestral homeland in the Khanty Mountains. The exact route was carefully concealed, and everyone who encountered the funeral procession along the way was reportedly killed, ensuring no one could pinpoint the burial site. Once the burial was complete, thousands of horses were supposedly stampeded over the grave to obliterate any trace, and according to legend, trees were planted or a river was diverted over the area to further obscure it. The soldiers who performed the burial were then in turn killed by others who were themselves killed, creating layers of secrecy that have protected the grave's location for centuries. Historians still argue whether the secrecy of Genghis Khan's burial was primarily driven by his own wishes for a humble resting place, or if it was a pragmatic decision by his successors to prevent desecration by enemies and to foster an aura of mystique around the great Khan, preserving his legend. Whatever the reason, the successful concealment of his tomb stands as one of history's greatest archaeological mysteries, making it almost impossible to study his final resting place without modern technology. His death marked the end of an era, but for the Mongol Empire he had forged, it was merely the beginning of its global expansion, guided by the legacy of the universal ruler who had passed into legend. The death of Genghis Khan, shrouded in secrecy and mystique, could have plunged the vast, nascent Mongol Empire into chaos. History is replete with examples of empires collapsing upon the demise of their charismatic founders. However, Genghis Khan, with his characteristic foresight, had meticulously planned for this eventuality. This section explores his remarkable legacy and succession plan, which, despite inevitable challenges, ensured the continuity and further expansion of the Mongol Empire he had so painstakingly forged. Long before his death, Genghis Khan had established a clear line of succession, adhering to the Mongol tradition of ultimogeniture, where the youngest son, or youngest surviving son, inherits the bulk of the father's property, including the ancestral lands and the imperial title. In this case, his third son, Ogjadai, was designated as his successor, or Great Khan, Kagan, a decision that had been ratified by the Kurultai years earlier. This was a crucial move, as it prevented the immediate power struggles that often tore apart nomadic confederations upon a leader's death. While his eldest son, Yochi, had died before him, and his second son, Chagatai, was known for his fierce temperament, Ogedei was chosen for his diplomatic skills, his ability to mediate between his strong-willed brothers, and his loyalty to his father's vision. It was a choice that prioritized stability and unity rather than pure military prowess. However, Genghis Khan also adhered to another Mongol tradition, the division of the empire among his sons, known as the ulus. While Ogedei inherited the supreme authority as Khagan, and with it, the core Mongol lands and the right to direct future conquests, his three surviving brothers, Chagatai, Tolui, and the deceased Jochi's line, represented by his sons, were each granted their own ulus, or appanages, vast territories to govern. Chagatai received Central Asia, Tolui, as the youngest, inherited the ancestral Mongol homeland, and the Jochid line received the lands to the west, eventually forming the Golden Horde. This distribution was designed to provide each son with a domain and a degree of autonomy, while theoretically keeping them united under the overall authority of the Great Khan. It was a system that aimed to balance familial duty with imperial unity, a bit like a medieval corporate structure, but with more horses and fewer quarterly reports. The immediate aftermath of Genghis Khan's death saw his youngest son, Tolui, act as regent, holding the reins of power for 2 years until the formal Kurultai could be convened to officially confirm Ogedei's ascension. This period of regency, though peaceful, underscored the fragility of the new imperial structure and the importance of a clear succession plan. Tolui, a brilliant military commander in his own right, diligently followed his father's wishes, ensuring a smooth transition. When Ogedei formally ascended to the throne as the Great Khan in 1229, he proved to be a capable and intelligent ruler, living up to his father's trust. He understood that the empire needed to evolve beyond pure conquest. He initiated significant administrative reforms, expanding the Yam postal system, establishing fixed cities and administrative centers, and beginning a more systematic collection of taxes. He also continued the expansionist policies of his father, launching new campaigns into Russia and Europe under the brilliant General Subutai, and completing the conquest of the Jin dynasty in China. He even built a permanent capital at Karakoram, a significant departure from the nomadic traditions of his ancestors, symbolizing the transition from a raiding confederation to a settled empire. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan's plan for succession, with the division of the ulus among his sons, was ultimately a source of strength or weakness for the empire. While it initially provided stability and prevented immediate internal conflict, it eventually contributed to the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire into separate, autonomous khanates in later generations, each pursuing its own interests. However, in the immediate aftermath of his death, this carefully orchestrated succession plan ensured that the Mongol war machine did not falter. The momentum of conquest continued, fueled by the vision and structures put in place by its founder. Genghis Khan had not just created an empire, he had created a system designed to outlive him, ensuring that his legacy would continue to shape the world for centuries to come. The death of Genghis Khan, while a monumental event, was by no means the end of the vast imperium he had so diligently constructed. Rather, it marked the transition of the Mongol Empire after Genghis from the singular vision of its founder to the collective, yet sometimes fractious, rule of his successors. Under the leadership of his sons and grandsons, the empire continued its astonishing expansion, reaching its zenith in terms of territorial control, even as the seeds of its eventual fragmentation were inadvertently sown. Ogedei Khan, as the designated Great Khan, proved to be a capable and strategic leader. He understood that his father's vision of a unified world dominion required continued military expansion and the institutionalization of the empire. He initiated further large-scale campaigns, most notably the invasion of the Rus's principalities and Eastern Europe under the brilliant General Subutai, and the final conquest of the Jin dynasty in northern China. These campaigns brought immense new territories, wealth, and populations under Mongol control, pushing the empire's borders further than even Genghis Khan had imagined. It's almost as if he picked up the torch and just kept running with it, quite literally, across continents. Ogedei also focused on solidifying the administrative structures of the empire. He understood that a vast realm could not be governed solely from horseback. He established a permanent capital at Karakorum in central Mongolia, a bustling city that became a hub for trade, diplomacy, and administration, attracting merchants, artisans, and scholars from across Eurasia. This shift from a purely nomadic encampment to a fixed capital was a profound, symbolic, and practical step, signaling the Mongols' transition from conquerors to rulers. He also refined the taxation system and strengthened the Yam postal network, ensuring better communication and control across the immense distances of the empire. However, the very success of the empire under Ogedei and his successors, particularly the growth of the various ulas granted to Genghis Khan's other sons, eventually led to internal tensions. While the Great Khan in Karakorum held nominal supreme authority, the regional Khanates, the Golden Horde in the west, Yochi's line, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Il Khanate in Persia, later established by Hulagu, Tolui's son, began to develop their own distinct identities and interests. The vast distances and differing cultural landscapes of their respective domains inevitably led to divergent paths. Imagine trying to manage a sprawling global corporation when each regional manager insists on doing things their own way. Succession after Ogedei's death in 1241 became more complicated, leading to periods of regency and power struggles among Genghis Khan's grandchildren. This internal politicking temporarily slowed the pace of conquest, as various claimants to the Great Khanate jostled for power. The election of Mongol Khan in 1251, a son of Tolui, temporarily restored strong leadership and revived the momentum of expansion, particularly with the campaigns of Hulagu into the Middle East and Kublai Khan into southern China. Yet, despite these periods of robust central authority, the inherent tensions between the Great Khanate and the increasingly autonomous regional Khanates continued to grow. The death of Mongol Khan in 1259 and the ensuing civil war between his brothers, Kublai Khan and Arik Bokeh, marked a definitive turning point. While Kublai eventually emerged victorious and moved the capital to Beijing, establishing the Yuan dynasty in China, his authority over the Western Khanates became increasingly nominal. The empire, though still connected by a shared Mongol heritage and the legacy of Genghis Khan, effectively fractured into 4 independent entities, each pursuing its own destiny. Historians still argue whether this fragmentation was inevitable given the sheer size and diversity of the empire, or if a different succession strategy might have preserved its unity longer. Regardless, the Mongol Empire, under Genghis Khan's successors, continued to be a dominant force for centuries, even in its fragmented form. It demonstrated the enduring power of the foundations laid by its founder, even as his descendants began to chart their own, sometimes conflicting, courses across the vast lands they now commanded. The world was forever changed by the unparalleled expansion that continued long after Genghis Khan's final breath. The thunderous hooves of the Mongol armies, guided by Genghis Khan and then his successors, did more than just conquer vast swathes of land. They irrevocably altered the course of history, leaving an indelible impact on Eurasia that reverberated for centuries. This wasn't just about military victories. It was about the profound, sometimes contradictory, ways in which the Mongol conquests facilitated cultural exchange, transformed trade routes, and influenced governance across an entire continent. One of the most immediate and significant impacts was on trade. The Mongols, once fearsome raiders, quickly understood the economic benefits of stability and safe passage. They established the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace, across their vast empire. This meant that for a period, spanning from Eastern Europe to the Pacific, merchants, travelers, and goods could move with relative safety along the revitalized Silk Road routes. This unprecedented security led to a massive resurgence in overland trade, connecting east and west in ways never before seen. Spices, silks, porcelain, and other exotic goods flowed westward, while European goods, though fewer in number, made their way eastward. Imagine a medieval version of a global supply chain, suddenly made incredibly efficient by a single, albeit fearsome, authority. Beyond material goods, the Pax Mongolica facilitated an astonishing exchange of ideas, technologies, and knowledge. Chinese inventions like gunpowder, printing, and the compass, already known in parts of Asia, rapidly diffused westward through Mongol patronage and the safe passage they provided. Islamic advancements in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine also traveled eastward. Similarly, European ideas and scientific knowledge, though perhaps less impactful in the initial exchange, also found their way to Asia. This cross-cultural pollination was profound, leading to advancements in various fields across Eurasia, accelerating intellectual development in ways that might have taken centuries without the Mongol catalyst. Historians still argue whether the Mongols were active promoters of this cultural exchange or merely passive facilitators by providing security. However, the fact remains that under their rule, the flow of information was unprecedented. The Mongol conquests also had a dramatic demographic and political impact. Entire populations were displaced or annihilated in the early brutal phases of conquest, particularly in Khwarezm and parts of China. This led to significant population shifts and the decline of certain urban centers. Politically, the Mongols shattered old empires and kingdoms, replacing them with their own administrative structures, albeit ones often adapted from local customs. The fall of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad to Hulagu Khan, for instance, marked the symbolic end of the Islamic Golden Age and a profound shift in the political landscape of the Middle East. Similarly, in Russia, the Mongol yoke, as it came to be known, profoundly shaped the development of the Russian state, influencing its autocratic traditions and isolating it from Western European developments for centuries. Perhaps less obvious, but equally significant, was the military legacy. The Mongol tactics of speed, deception, and coordinated cavalry attacks, initially baffling to their opponents, forced other armies to adapt and to innovate. European military leaders, in particular, began to study the Mongol approach, leading to changes in cavalry tactics and fortifications. The sheer scale of Mongol campaigns also demonstrated new levels of logistical organization and strategic planning. However, the Mongol impact was not uniformly positive. The initial conquests were marked by unparalleled destruction, and the economic burden of Mongol rule, through heavy taxation and demands for tribute, often stifled local economies in the long run. Disease, notably the Black Death, is also believed by many scholars to have spread more rapidly and widely across Eurasia due to the interconnectedness fostered by the Mongol trade routes, a grim unintended consequence of their global reach. It's a reminder that progress, even when it looks like advancement, can often carry unforeseen and devastating side effects. Yet for all the destruction, the Mongol legacy remains one of unparalleled interconnectedness, forging a Eurasian superhighway that profoundly shaped the modern world, a colossal, if sometimes terrifying, experiment in globalization centuries before the term was even conceived. The colossal figure of Genghis Khan, a man who unified disparate tribes and forged the largest contiguous land empire in history, has perhaps inevitably become shrouded in an enduring mystique. His image shifts and transforms across cultures and centuries, from a ruthless barbarian to a visionary leader, a testament to the complex and often contradictory legacy he left behind. This section delves into the various historical interpretations and popular perceptions of Genghis Khan, highlighting how his story continues to captivate and puzzle scholars and lay people alike. For much of Western history, particularly after the devastating Mongol invasions of Europe, Genghis Khan was depicted as a monstrous, destructive force, a scourge of God, leading hordes of savage horsemen who brought only death and desolation. Medieval chroniclers and later European historians, traumatized by the sheer speed and brutality of the Mongol advance, painted him as the epitome of barbaric cruelty. This perception was often reinforced by the accounts of those who suffered under Mongol rule, focusing on the destruction of cities, the massacres, and the sheer terror he inspired. This narrative, while rooted in real events, often overshadowed the administrative and organizational genius that underpinned his conquests, simplifying a complex historical figure into a one-dimensional villain. It's almost as if they forgot that even a scourge of God needs a pretty good logistics team to get anywhere. However, within Mongolia itself, and increasingly in modern scholarship, a vastly different image of Genghis Khan has emerged. He is revered as the founding father of the Mongolian nation, a national hero who brought unity, law, and unprecedented prosperity to his people. He is celebrated for ending centuries of tribal warfare, for establishing a written language, for introducing a unified legal code, the Yasa, and for promoting religious tolerance. For many Mongolians, he is the embodiment of their national identity, a symbol of strength, resilience, and a glorious past. His face graces their currency. His name is invoked with pride, and statues in his honor stand tall across the landscape. Scholars today often attempt to reconcile these disparate images, seeking a more nuanced understanding of Genghis Khan. They acknowledge the undeniable brutality of his conquests, the massacres, and the sheer scale of destruction wrought by his armies. Yet they also emphasize his strategic brilliance, his administrative innovations, his meritocratic system of promotion, and his pragmatic approach to governance. He was a ruthless pragmatist, willing to employ extreme violence to achieve his objectives, but also capable of extraordinary vision and long-term planning. He was a product of his harsh environment, where survival demanded strength and where mercy was often a luxury few could afford. The very mystery surrounding his life and death, particularly the unknown location of his tomb, adds to his mystique. This deliberate concealment has allowed his legend to grow, making him an almost mythical figure, a man whose power was so immense that even his resting place remains hidden from the eyes of the world. This enduring secret only fuels curiosity and reinforces his almost superhuman status. Historians still argue whether the romanticized image of Genghis Khan as a benevolent unifier in modern Mongolia is a complete historical distortion or a valid reinterpretation of a figure long misrepresented by Western sources. The truth, as often happens, likely lies somewhere in the middle, a complex tapestry of both light and shadow. His mystique, however, is undeniable, ensuring that the name of Genghis Khan continues to resonate centuries after his thunderous passage across the world stage. The shadow of Genghis Khan, cast long and wide across history, continues to influence the world, particularly in his native Mongolia, but also in broader global consciousness. His presence in Genghis Khan in modern times is a fascinating study in how historical figures are remembered, reinterpreted, and sometimes repurposed to fit contemporary narratives. He remains a figure of immense power, controversy, and inspiration, far removed from the dusty pages of ancient chronicles. In Mongolia, Genghis Khan is not merely a historical figure, he is the undisputed national icon. After decades of Soviet influence that largely suppressed his memory due to ideological reasons, his tribal feudal connections were not considered appropriate for a communist narrative, despite his revolutionary impact. His image has been spectacularly resurrected since Mongolia's transition to democracy. He is celebrated as the founder of the Mongolian state, the unifier of the Mongol people, and the symbol of their past glory and future aspirations. His face appears on currency, on vodka bottles, and in countless public monuments. The capital city, Ulaanbaatar, boasts a colossal equestrian statue of him, a pilgrimage site for many. Schools teach his life story with pride, emphasizing his strategic genius, his creations of a legal code, and his role in bringing the Mongols onto the world stage. For modern Mongolians, he represents resilience, national pride, and the ability of a nomadic people to achieve greatness against all odds. It's a bit like how Americans view their founding fathers, but with more horses and much, much wider hats. Beyond Mongolia, Genghis Khan's image is more complex and often contradictory. In the West, while the old barbarian narrative still occasionally surfaces, there's a growing recognition of his sophisticated military and administrative genius. Business schools study his logistical prowess and leadership strategies. Military academies analyze his campaigns for lessons in strategy and tactics. He is increasingly seen as a complex figure, a brilliant, albeit brutal innovator, rather than just a destructive force. Books, documentaries, and even video games explore his life and empire, often trying to present a more balanced view of his legacy. However, the controversies surrounding his historical actions certainly persist. The immense death toll and widespread destruction associated with his conquests are undeniable and form a significant part of his historical record. Debates continue about the extent of his personal responsibility for massacres versus the prevailing warfare norms of the time, and whether the long-term benefits of the Pax Mongolica outweighed the immediate suffering. His name still conjures images of unbridled power and terror in regions that suffered under Mongol rule, particularly in parts of Russia, Persia, and China, where historical memory often emphasizes the devastation rather than the subsequent period of stability. Interestingly, Genghis Khan's legacy has also seeped into popular culture in unexpected ways. His name is synonymous with unstoppable force, appearing in various contexts from sports teams to fictional characters. He is a recurring archetype in historical dramas and adventure stories, embodying the ultimate conqueror. This widespread recognition, regardless of its accuracy, ensures his name remains etched in the global lexicon. Historians still argue whether the modern popularization of Genghis Khan, particularly the heroic image, sometimes glosses over the undeniable brutality of his era in favor of a more palatable narrative. Regardless, his story continues to fascinate, reflecting humanity's enduring interest in figures who radically altered the course of civilization. He remains a symbol of power, ambition, and the profound impact a single individual can have on the tapestry of human history. And so, we arrive at the very end of our journey through the remarkable life of Genghis Khan, leaving us with one final, profound mystery that continues to captivate archaeologists, historians, and adventurers to this day: the location of the unseen grave. The great Khan, who had dominated vast continents in life, chose to vanish into the earth in death, his final resting place remaining undiscovered for over 8 centuries. As we discussed earlier, the secrecy surrounding Genghis Khan's burial was extraordinary. His loyal followers went to extreme lengths to ensure that his grave would remain hidden, perhaps forever. Legend speaks of his body being carried back to his ancestral homeland in the Khenti Mountains, a sacred and revered area in eastern Mongolia. Along the way, any individual, animal, or even blade of grass that witnessed the funeral procession was reportedly eliminated to prevent any clues from surfacing. Once the burial was complete, the stories tell of thousands of horses being stampeded over the grave to flatten the earth and obliterate any trace, followed by the planting of trees or even the diversion of a river over the site. The soldiers involved in the burial were then in turn killed by others who were themselves killed, creating an impenetrable veil of secrecy. It's a bit like a highly efficient, albeit extremely morbid, secret-keeping operation, making sure that what happens in the Khenti Mountains stays in the Khenti Mountains. This deliberate act of concealment was not merely a whim, it was deeply rooted in Mongol traditions and belief. For the Mongols, a powerful individual's spirit was tied to their remains. An undisturbed grave meant an undisturbed spirit, able to watch over and protect the nation. Conversely, a desecrated grave could bring calamity. This belief, combined with the pragmatic desire to prevent enemies from desecrating the tomb or using it as a symbol against the Mongol Empire, solidified the determination to keep its location a profound secret. Today, the Khenti Mountains remain a sacred and largely untouched wilderness, a vast expanse of rolling hills, dense forests, and pristine rivers. It is a harsh environment, sparsely populated, making the search for any specific site incredibly challenging. While numerous archaeological expeditions have scoured the region using modern technologies like satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and drone surveys, none have definitively located Genghis Khan's tomb. Every few years, news might surface of a promising anomaly or a potential lead, but thus far, none have withstood rigorous academic scrutiny. The Mongolian government, while acknowledging the immense historical and cultural significance of finding the tomb, also balances this with a deep respect for the Khan's wishes and the sacred nature of the Khenti region. There is a strong sentiment among many Mongolians that the Khan's resting place should remain undisturbed, honoring his desire for a simple, secret burial. They believe that to unearth it would be to disturb his peace and potentially invite misfortune. This cultural reverence adds another layer of complexity to the archaeological quest. Historians still argue whether the absence of any historical record of the burial site means that the Mongolians were simply incredibly successful at keeping secrets, or if perhaps the Khan's burial was far less grand than legend suggests, making it inherently harder to find. The mystery of the unseen grave serves as a powerful metaphor for Genghis Khan himself. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind that swept across continents, transforming the world in his wake. Yet in death, he chose anonymity, becoming a quiet legend, his final resting place as elusive and enigmatic as the windswept steppes from which he emerged. And so, his story, born from hardship and rising to unparalleled triumph, gently fades into the quiet whispers of the past, leaving behind only the echo of thunderous hooves and the enduring secret of a man who changed everything, then disappeared into the earth he once commanded. The wind, now a gentle sigh, whispers across the vast plains, carrying tales not of conquest, but of quiet repose. The thundering hooves have long since softened into distant memories, and the clash of steel has dissolved into the rustling of tall grasses under a peaceful sky. The grand ambitions, the strategic movements, the rise and fall of empires, they all settle now, like dust motes in the fading light. Imagine the quiet vastness of the steppe, stretching out under an endless canopy of stars, a place where time seems to slow, allowing thoughts to drift like clouds. The stories we've shared tonight of fierce determination and monumental change now become part of the ancient air, woven into the very fabric of the landscape where it all began. There's a comforting rhythm to these historical tides, a reassurance in the way even the mightiest figures eventually return to the earth their legacy settling into the quiet hum of eternity. The past, in its infinite complexity, eventually finds its calm, allowing the present moment to unfold with a gentle peace. Let these ancient whispers guide you now, as the night deepens and the world outside grows still. Allow your own thoughts to soften, your breath to deepen, and your mind to embrace the quiet beauty of the moment. The journey through history ends here for tonight, leaving only tranquility in its wake.